Thanks, Zach. I'm so excited to be chatting with you guys at Iowa Ideas this year at your virtual conference. It's a lot of fun for me because Iowa obviously has a lot of special meaning to me. And I know that you folks are trying to solve a lot of interesting and complicated problems in the state. And so I'm excited to be a part of that. I'm hoping that some of my stories will come in handy for you as you try and solve your problems here on Earth. I wanted to start off by saying, of course, I came from Iowa as well, a small town called Beaconsfield, 32 people total, was about 4 miles away. And this is a picture of the farm. So we were cattle and hog and corn and soybeans, pretty much like most of the farmers in Iowa. The little town of Beaconsfield had the first Hy-Vee store in the world, in the state, and but you can see it also had very modern appliances like the town water pump in front of it. And growing up with 32 people in that little town, I got to see a lot more cattle and hogs than I ever saw people. But I did all the same things that Iowa kids do, playing in the snow and playing in the water and showing cattle for 4-H and doing other 4-H projects. But when I was 9 years old, something really, truly amazing happened. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon for the first time. And it was a very exciting moment for me. And even at 9, I knew that was a very special moment. And I thought, wow, cool job. But when you're 9, you want to be lots of things. But this really made an impression on me. And I think part of the reason it stuck with me is the following year, my dad got his private pilot's license. And I got to go on my first airplane ride and see the Earth from above. That was amazing perspective for me at 10 years old. And I was like, oh, wow, I really do want to be an explorer and explore new worlds and do new things. And so that was my inspiration for wanting to learn to fly also. And however, it took a lot of money. So I sold a lot of chickens at $2 a head to get enough money to pay for flying lessons about 10 years later. But it goes to show that you can translate an inspiration into action and really make something happen in your life. I think that another key moment in my life came when I graduated from high school, and that's the year that NASA selected the very first female astronauts. And that made me think that maybe this isn't just a dream, maybe I really can become an astronaut. And so as I graduated from high school, I had this dream that now became a goal for me. Of course, it's not always an easy path. I wasn't willing to tell a lot of people. I was a very shy person. But when I first decided to share my goal of becoming an astronaut with my advisor at Iowa Wesleyan College, she wanted me to meet Dr. James Van Allen, the certified space science guy of Iowa, who discovered and had the Van Allen radiation belts named after him. And I met him at the University of Iowa and hoped that he might give me some advice for what I might be able to do to become an astronaut. What would improve my chances, since I was, Iowa farm kid, I had no idea how to go about it. And he said, well, that whole astronaut thing's just a flash in the pan. You probably need to get a real job, a real career like engineering or astrophysics, something like that. And it was interesting to me. I was, of course, pretty discouraged. However, it's not something that deterred me completely, because it still felt right for me that I should pursue my path to become an astronaut. And that year I talked to him, it was in 1981, before the first shuttle flight. So that he didn't know there was going to be 30 years of space flight and beyond, since we've had 20 years of an International Space Station beyond that. But interestingly, I also had another experience after I graduated from graduate school. with my PhD in biochemistry. I was doing interviews, one at the Salk Institute, very prestigious plant biochemist was there, and he offered me a position. And when I called him back a week later to turn him down because I had accepted a fellowship at the Johnson Space Center, he said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. And so I had a couple of pretty prestigious folks tell me this was not the right thing to do. But luckily for me, I didn't listen to them. And I persevered anyway, in spite of that lack of support there. But I think what made it possible is I had some amazing female role models and mentors. I had an advisor at Rice University and at Iowa Wesleyan. And then when I got to the Johnson Space Center, some amazing female mentors there that were leaders. And it made me believe that I too could become an astronaut, or I had the potential to do these things that I dreamed of. And so it kept me going, which was a good thing because I applied for 10 years and got rejected all those years. I was still working at NASA, and I was negotiating, farm girl, negotiating with international partners in Russia and other countries. And interestingly, I can say in retrospect that those 10 years were probably some of the most important 10 years of my development. Although at the time, I really, really thought I should be an astronaut right now. And luckily for me, I was learning a lot of team skills and those negotiation capabilities, and it was all important. And now in retrospect, I can say that those skills were the ones that allowed me to become the first female commander of the International Space Station and the first female and non-military leader of the astronaut office. So all of those things that, became very important to me much later in life were actually a part of those 10 years of rejection, and were enabled by that. So I like to remind people that sometimes your path to a goal isn't always a straight line, and you have to keep in mind that you need to learn from the experiences that you're exposed to, and you need to challenge yourself in those experiences to do even more than you think you can, because surprisingly, you will find out you are capable of more. At least I did. And I like to advise people that really your life and your capabilities begin when you get to the end of your comfort zone. So all of us could go through life and choose the easy way, knowing that, hey, I can do this because I'll be successful, or I can, take on this task because I know I can do it. But the real challenges actually come when you step beyond what you're comfortable doing and finding out what you're truly capable of, and learning how to do even more the next time you step out of your comfort zone. So obviously, once I did get selected to become an astronaut, I had lots of learning to do. And I was definitely out of my comfort zone, learning how to, be a co-pilot in a spacecraft and deal with fire emergencies on board, and survival training, robotics, and spacewalk training. All of that was very complicated and all very challenging to me. But in the end, all of them led up to me being able to be an astronaut. And I was really lucky. I got to fly in space 3 different times. The first time I launched and landed on a shuttle, and the second and third time on the Russian Soyuz vehicle. And those missions were 6 months, 6 months, and 9.5 months. It's quite impressive to launch on a rocket, as you might imagine. And there's a lot of vibrations initially, and then for the shuttle in particular, when the solid rocket boosters ignite, there is just no doubt that you're going to go somewhere. But flying into space, surprisingly, only takes about 8.5 minutes to get there. You go from 0 to 17,500 miles an hour in that time. So there's a little acceleration going on. And this was my arrival to the space station on my last flight. And it was great to get on board because it was like coming back home again. On my first flight, I wanted to chat about it just briefly, because that launch and landing on the shuttle with the 6 months in between, I got to do lots of different kinds of experiments, but one of them was growing soybeans. So while my dad was growing soybeans on the ground, I was growing soybeans in space. And interestingly, in space, the soybeans grew up to the light at the top of the container and then turned around and went back down, because they didn't have anywhere else to go inside the container. And so I just thought that was kind of funny. And also it was neat that, I was growing them at the same time my dad was. Everyone always asks, what's the best part about being in space? And the best part about being in space is actually being in space. There is just so much that you don't realize that you have generated in your life that is based, and it's in your head. It's based on the fact that you live in gravity. Everything is based on that. And you don't even recognize it until you get into space. There's little things like, for instance, the trick to play on the new guy is ask him to throw something to you. And he's going to throw something to you from across the module, and it will invariably hit the ceiling, because he's planning a trajectory that's based on Earth gravity. And that doesn't exist up there. And so it will always hit the ceiling, because you don't have to plan on that. Of course, when I got home after my first flight, I blew my nose and was throwing the tissue in the trash bag and the trash can, and the can was only a foot away, but it dropped straight down to the floor because I'd stopped correcting for gravity. So you learn the opposite lesson as well as you come back and readapt back to Earth. But being adaptable, I think, is part of what it is to live in zero gravity. And I think that's an important characteristic for all of us in our work and in our life in general. This picture I like, because if you look at my feet, they're hooked under the handrails. And I'm pulling on a rack that weighs around 1,200 pounds. Of course, in zero gravity, it has no weight. It still has mass, so you have to move it very slowly in order to control it, but it has no weight. But I'm using my feet to do a lot of that control, but not the way you would here on Earth. And in fact, once you get to space, you adapt to the fact that you're not walking on your feet. And after a couple of months, the calluses all come off the bottom of your feet. And actually, I started developing little calluses on the ridges of my toes on the top side of my feet. So adaptation is an interesting process that we all go through in all of our lives. And I think it's neat that microgravity shows us a very different way, and a very obvious way, that we have to adapt all the time. I think that, obviously my story of 10 years of rejections shows a lot of perseverance, but another area where there was a lot of perseverance required was the physical and mental challenge of doing a spacewalk in a spacesuits that were, a little too big for me. And so that training for that, as well as the actual spacewalk itself, required a lot of dedication, perseverance, and motivation to stay engaged and to not give up and to not quit during that process. And I have just a short little video clip here. And it shows me with all my tools on the front of me, and I'm tethered to the station so I don't fall off. And you can see there's pretty phenomenal view out there while you're doing your work. And here, you may not be able to see it, but at the very end of the truss there, that's me. And that just illustrates how large the International Space Station is. This is another view after we'd added on this node and PMA to the International Space Station, and we had connected all the umbilical trays to the station itself. So it was a pretty amazing experience to be a part of that. Over the years, I've had 10 spacewalks, and I think 3 of them were unplanned. So it's been quite the experience for me. It's also very important to have teamwork, and NASA, I think, is great at that. it is the key to a lot of their successes and a lot of their problem solvings. It's not just the crew on board that has to be a team. It includes all the ground team on below that has to, help and come up with solutions and offer alternatives when things aren't going as planned. Again, that adaptability is very important. And leadership and followership is a key to making a team very successful. And I think, most people consider followership something passive and that I'm just going to do what I'm told. And that's not at all the definition of followership in an astronaut's mind. It is, what can I do to help offload the commander or to make this mission a success? Where do I need to step up and offer my options and solutions because I'm more of an expertise in this particular area than the commander might be? So being proactive as a follower is an important aspect. And so that team has to be a thread throughout work and life, I think, to be successful. But I do think that teamwork can solve really impossible problems. The solar arrays on the truss of the International Space Station, each array is 115 feet long. And so they're huge and they're paper thin. And during one of my missions, I was been a commander for a whole 6 months, and I was redeploying a solar array that we had repositioned to its final location on the station. And partway through, it started to tear. Before I could get it stopped, we had this big hole about 5 feet long in the solar array, and it was out near the end of at the end of the truss and near the end of the array itself. And it was going to be pretty impossible in my mind to solve this problem. But a young engineer on the ground came in and said, how about we just make cufflinks and, span that, there's holes, integral holes in the array, and span the tear, kind of like a Band-Aid, a suture across a cut that is getting stitched up. And then we can deploy the array fully. So that's what we ended up doing, was making these cufflinks. And let's see, oh, the video is not working. Anyway, the cufflinks were made from wire and pliers and cutting out metal. And of course, we didn't have a Home Depot, so we had to make it with all the stuff that we had available on board the station. And in the end, let's see if it'll let me there. It's not letting me play the video, but in the end, we ended up fixing that array after 4 days of troubleshooting and various different activities and some of the sportiest robotics ever. We got a guy out there close enough to thread those cufflinks into the array. And we were able to fully deploy it, and it produced 97% of its original planned power. So that was an amazing feat. I love this quote from Gandhi saying that leadership probably at one time meant muscles, but today it means getting along with people. And in fact, in the astronaut office, we have something called the expeditionary crew skills. Basically, it's the soft skills. All the astronauts are technically qualified in some particular area that they were selected for, but the soft skills are the ones that are so important in a long duration space flight. And if you think about it, it's kind of like the soft skills that you had to have during COVID when you were isolated in the house with maybe just a couple of other people and you didn't have any choice with who you were staying with or how long you were, confined to quarters in essence. And so those soft skills become very, very important, as I'm sure a lot of folks have learned over the last year and a half or two. When I was selected to be the first female commander of the International Space Station, there was obviously kind of a lot of pressure on me. I didn't want to fail, but I really do believe if you're afraid of failure, you're never going to truly succeed. And so I did my very best to, pave the way for other females to be commanders in the future. And we even had a very unique crew poster. I think it's also really important to be a mentor. I never thought of myself as being a mentor, but when I became the first female commander, and coincidentally, Pam Melroy was like the second shuttle commander, came up and docked to the space station at the same time. And it was the first time we had two female commanders of two different spacecraft in orbit at the same time. And it made me realize, you know, with this Jeff Parker cartoon, he's Florida Today cartoonist, that, you know, there was even more of an expectation that that I was a role model, and that how important mentorship is. And it was incredibly important to me. As I mentioned, I had some incredibly strong female leaders as role models, and they really, truly helped me feel I could succeed. And then I have enjoyed actually training some of the other female astronauts on how to do spacewalks, trying to share some of my tricks of the trade and make it easier for them to be successful in their futures as well. And everyone asks, what words of advice would you give to a young person or to anyone? And it's that whole living outside your comfort zone. So I thought this picture, I was in a cargo bag, and one of my crewmates said, I think that bag is so big I could almost fit it. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure I can. So they zipped me into the bag and they carried me down to the other end of the station for our friend Oleg, and said he thought he was getting some clothing. And I popped out of the bag and surprised them all. But it was a funny joke. But getting out of your cargo bag or getting out of your comfort zone really is the key to challenging yourself to do more than you think you can. It truly has amazed me what I have been able to accomplish just by challenging myself to do more than I thought I could. I never dreamed of being a commander. I wanted to be an astronaut, but I'd never dreamed of being a commander. After I did one flight, I thought, well, I could be a commander. So I challenged myself to try and get that job, which I was successful at. And then after that, I became the first female chief of the astronaut office. So challenging yourself can really, you know, enhance your whole life. It can allow you to do so much more than you might ever have imagined. As the chief astronaut, it was a very challenging time. It was when the shuttle program was coming to an end, and there were a lot of personnel reductions because we were focusing on long duration space flights, so we needed fewer crew members. So I had to cut the office by about 30%, which was not a trivial thing. And so leading during change is obviously very challenging, and another challenge that I wasn't sure I could withstand, but I made it and I learned a lot from it. So again, step out of your comfort zone every chance you get. Diversity actually is a strength, and I know that that's one of your topics for the Iowa Ideas, and I think it's really important because NASA's success at problem solving, a lot of it has to do with the fact that everybody comes from different backgrounds and ideas, or different experiences, life experiences, and those allow different approaches and ideas once you're trying to solve a problem. And I love the quote, none of us are as smart as all of us. And in the astronaut office, there, you know, not only do you have the cultural and racial and gender diversity, but you also have the scientist, the engineer, the pilot, the civilian, the military. So there's all kinds of diversity in life. And I think it's really important for all of us to accept all of those and take advantage of the skill sets offered by a different viewpoint. And I think it provides a strength. And so I was happy to see that included in the Iowa Ideas. And this was just to show some of the females that I've worked with and trained with. This was my EVA instructor, training how to do a particular task. They hang you, suspend you up, and support you, like, and make you kind of weightless, and you have to do a task. And then there's the lower left shows all the female astronauts when I was on orbit in mission control. The upper right shows a really interesting gal. She had a degree in fashion design, and she was heat sealing the inner bladder of a spacesuit together. I just think the diversity of different backgrounds that can apply. And then I had a number of female divers and technical support people that supported my training when I was training underwater for those spacewalks. And that was just one day they had an all-girl team on when I was there. And everyone talks about work-life balance, and being in space, that I think gets emphasized a lot, because your work and your life don't get separated. You're all together all the time. And, we have little, what we call sleep stations, which are big enough for a sleeping bag and a computer. But for the most part, we're living together all the time. And so we do a lot of things to maintain, that work-life balance, making sure that we do take some time off and do some other things that were fun. I grew lettuce on my last flight, and so I was able to make a special crab salad that Toma and I are fighting over. And I had planned in advance that we would have a Christmas cookie decorating contest at Christmas time. And so I had to make it a contest in order to get the guys to take it seriously. But I had a flight director who also decorated cakes, and she was our judge. And she judged Oleg's cookie as the best one because of his creative use of color. He used Russian mustard on his cookie to get the yellow for his son. Let's see if this video will play. This is another little video that I had also had green Jello made up for our Christmas celebration, and which is kind of unusual. We don't normally have that on board, and so I had that made up and playing around with that. But the perspective of being in space is actually really an amazing one. You have this view of Earth where everyone that you know, other than the 4 to 5 guys that are with you in the space station, everyone you know lives there. And you get this really sense of what our planet does for us. If you look, there's a thin blue line, and that thin blue line is our atmosphere. And it protects us, it provides it, underneath it, we have our oxygen provided, carbon dioxide is removed. The temperature is reasonably controlled, except sometimes in Iowa. And the radiation environment's protected by the magnetosphere. We have a really special place. And when you're trying to construct another place away from planet Earth, you realize how much Earth is like a spaceship and is something that to be protected and very special. And it gives you this sense of whole. And here's another shot of the limb of the Earth just before sunrise. So the sun is coming through the atmosphere. It's lighting up the station because we're 250 miles up, so we're above the shadow as it's coming around the Earth. And I just think it's a dramatic way to see our planet, how special it is. But what's really interesting is the perspective you get when you look out to the stars, because you see the Earth as something that is our everything. And then you look out to the stars and you see thousands and thousands and thousands of stars. And that's just in our little galaxy. And there are billions and billions of galaxies, literally. And we're just such a small part of that. So that perspective is something that I think is a very special treat with being in space. It gives us that. Right now, I'm consulting with Axiom Space. We hope to build the first commercial space station. It will initially be attached to the International Space Station. So you see the station here, and if this video works, we'll show kind of the assembly process as we add new modules to the space station, using the space station as our keep alive backup plan. Enables us to create the station less expensively. And then before the International Space Station is deorbited, we will separate from the space station with our commercial station and have that on orbit and to be the first commercial station in orbit. So it's really exciting for me. I've been consulting with Axiom for a year and a half now, and I was recently assigned to fly the second Axiom mission to begin our missions to the International Space Station. So I'm very excited that I'm not done flying yet. And I think that's another message to everybody. Just because you retire, it doesn't mean you're dead yet, and you can go on and do more. So I think the future holds unlimited possibilities. And I'd like to challenge each of you with, what are you going to do? And that's it.
Well, Peggy, thank you very much. It's mind-blowing, and it's a privilege to join you to ask questions. This is one of you have so many amazing, neat experiences, and I could spend a day doing this, but I have a lot of questions here, and some I've collected from kids, and some I've collected from my own space camp memories back as a fourth grader. I'm curious, this next chapter, I'm curious, what got you back in the game and wanting to go back into space? And, now it's got to be a little bit different going for NASA the first time and now in the private sector. I'm curious, what is that like?
It is very different. It's very exciting. If I'd stayed with NASA, I was not going to fly again because I'd reached my radiation limits. So I really didn't anticipate if the commercial industry would come back soon enough for me to have opportunities to fly again. So this is really icing on the cake that I might have this opportunity. What I think is special about it is the fact that it's different. It's from a commercial perspective instead of from the government perspective. I think everyone has seen a lot of the different commercial aspects going on with suborbital flights with Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic, and then SpaceX's recent commercial flight with Inspiration 4. So there are lots of new venues developing in space. And to me, this is kind of like the transition from barnstorming to commercial aviation. We are kind of in that phase of that transition. And I think it's really exciting to be a part of that, to see this change happen and hopefully have some influence on at least small pieces of how it's done.
I'm curious, is the training different after you've been through the NASA training? What is the experience like? How long will you prepare for the mission? I don't believe there's a date set yet.
Yeah, we are hoping it'll be next fall. We don't have a specific date yet, but I've already begun training. I'm backing up the crew for the first flight, which is planned for February of next year. And so I'm the backup commander for that flight. And so I've already started training. A lot of it is the same training, the International Space Station training. But this time I'm going to be launching and landing on a SpaceX Dragon. And so that's exciting because I get to learn a new vehicle as well. So that'll be the fun part. So I'm training in Hawthorne and Houston for that in their simulators for a new vehicle.
How different is that? Is it, the difference between driving a Ford and a Chevy, or is it, much bigger than that?
Well, the shuttle was an amazing piece of architecture. And it's hard to beat it in terms of mass that it put to orbit, but it doesn't have the newer technology. It was newer than, say, the Russian Soyuz spacecraft, in terms of technology, but this is a whole new huge step forward in terms of touchscreen displays, and it's really beautifully done. It's a smaller spacecraft, only 4 people inside, and it's just to carry people to orbit and to the space station. In our case, we'll go to space station between a day and 1 to 2 days, and then use it to come home again. But we'll be staying up on the International Space Station for 8 to 10 days.
I'm curious. I mean, on one hand, this would be exciting, but on many other hands, I think it's also terrifying at the same time. How do you, I mean, you're kind of, the phrase that we use sometimes is you're building the plane as you're flying it, but you're in unfamiliar situations all the time. How do you do that?
I think a lot of the way you adapt to those unfamiliar situations is through training. We do training in various simulations. We have every kind of malfunction and failure thrown at. We in International Space Station, we practice on fire and depressurization and toxic atmosphere, all things you'd never want to experience. But if you go through the training enough and you understand your roles, you understand what you can do, it gives you a sense of security that, if a bad day happened, I would at least know what I'm supposed to do. A bad day can still happen and that I can't survive, but I know what I'm supposed to do.
I'm curious, the idea of spacewalking, and you mentioned that you had several unplanned, but take me through the planned. What goes in preparation? It's not like on Earth where you walk out the door and you're out there, but how terrifying is that? Every picture you look at, it seems, I mean, like if you let go.
Well, interestingly, the space station's traveling at 17,500 miles an hour, and so are you. So as long as you stay tethered to the station, you're fine. You don't have to worry about it. But we do have various protocols and backup protocols in case the first one fails. We have tethers, and then there's a little kind of mini jetpack that you can fly back to the station if somehow your tether broke. And nobody's ever had to use that, but it's available to use. So there's ways to make that safe. But that's part of the things that we train for. And so the training for a spacewalk, a single spacewalk, will probably take on the order of a year in advance. You train, you do multiple runs underwater, you learn about the hardware, whatever it is you're going to install, you see the real hardware in person, then you practice underwater many, many times in the spacesuit, trying to figure out what body orientations you're going to use to manipulate the tools and get the job done. And then day of, on orbit, you have to prepare all your tools in advance and get everything ready to go outside. And that takes about a week of preparation. And then day of, you get in the spacesuit and you're in there pre-breathing oxygen to prevent having the bends, because you're going to a lower pressure when you go outside. And so it's just like diving, except kind of in the reverse, but you have to worry about getting the bends. So you pre-breathe on oxygen for 2 hours. Takes it takes about 2 hours to get suited up, breathe 2 hours, and then you go out the door for a 6 to 8 hour spacewalk. And it's against a pressurized spacesuit. So every motion with your hands requires strength to move against the pressure of the suit. So you're called a spacewalk, but you're using your hands to translate everywhere. You use your hands for the tools, you use your hands for the tethers. So it's pretty exhausting on your upper body during that course of 6 to 8 hours of spacewalking. And then you come back in and you got another hour to get out of the suits again.
You've mentioned a few times just kind of the different experience without gravity there. I'm curious, what's been the strangest anti-gravity experience that you've had?
Oh, it's hard to describe. It's funny because, like, if you let go of a tool, or a tool gets knocked off its Velcro off the wall or whatever, your brain is going to be looking for it. you're looking for this tool, and automatically your brain's looking at your feet, wherever your feet are. Even if your feet were on the ceiling, it's looking toward your feet. And so I always tell the new guy when they arrive, if you lose something, turn 90 degrees, because it's usually right there in front of you. It's just that your brain's not willing to see it above your head. So getting used to that is kind of a trick, a challenge to, learn how to, the nuances of what you've learned of a lifetime versus a lifetime of gravity, and how you adapt to some place where there is no gravity.
I'm curious also, the physical demands that you mentioned, how do you stay fit when you're up in space?
That's a great question. And so, we value weightlifting, but there's no weights in space. So we have a very specific resistive exercise device that allows us to pull and push against a resistance that basically simulates weightlifting. That's also important for bone strength, because while you're in space, that lack of gravity causes your bones to demineralize faster. So it's like, maybe your grandmother who has osteoporosis and her bones are becoming much more fragile and brittle. And so in 1 year, a geriatric woman will lose 1% of her bone mass. In space, if we don't exercise every day for a couple of hours, we lose 1% a month.
Wow.
So we are very motivated to exercise while we're in space. And we also do cardiovascular exercise to maintain that cardiovascular fitness. So we do treadmill, which you have to be harnessed down to the treadmill. Otherwise, your head would hit the ceiling the first step you took. And then we have a cycle ergometer, which actually is pretty much like a regular cycle, biking in the gym would be. You just can cycle on it with your biking shoes, except you're floating. You don't have to sit on a seat.
It's hard to comprehend some of these things and just how different that must be to get used to.
Yeah.
You mentioned teamwork and the importance of teamwork. And I'm curious, how long do you work with the team that, ends up on the mission with you? How much do you know about each other? And I mean, is that part of the exercise, getting to know each other?
It is. And so we end up training, from approximately 2 years for a spaceflight mission, for a NASA long duration mission. And of that 2 years, about a year of it's done closely with your crew. And then, of course, you have the time on orbit as well. You become very close and know each other's ins and outs during that time frame. So it's part of the process of training.
I would imagine being calm under pressure is also part of the training. Maybe you've always been like this. You've got a great sense of humor. I think you probably process some stress with that. But how do you stay calm?
I think, again, it goes back to the training. Being prepared can make you accept a lot more challenges, a lot more stresses, just by being prepared, training for it, knowing that you're capable of doing this, even though you're like, well, I'm going to do a spacewalk. But it's like, I've trained for this. I know how to do it, but I'm going to do a spacewalk. So, you process it because you've trained for it.
Okay. I'm curious, you mentioned the 10 years you were at NASA, the 10 years of rejections to the astronaut program. What was the drive there? So many people would say, I'm still at NASA, I've made it, look at this. Where were you finding that drive to keep pushing and to keep getting out of your comfort zone, to keep reaching for more?
I think it goes back to having the dream and wanting to make it happen for me. And it's what felt right to me. It's what I thought I should do. And I don't think it was a mistake at all.
You mentioned in your personal story about growing up in one of the smallest communities in the state. And I'm curious, how many times did you get you're not going to be able to do that? Nobody does that. Or, How many times did you hear that story?
Well, interestingly, I was too shy to really share my dream with anybody until after I graduated from high school. And that's when I started talking to people about it. And even some of my friends were like, really? You're not going to be able to do that. And so I don't know. I kept going anyway. It was what I wanted. I knew it was right for me.
Now, you managed some missions and training underwater too, correct? How
I did.
different is space from time underwater?
Yeah, I did a 14-day mission underwater. I was a commander on that mission. And we did daily spacewalks, which were just long dives. And we were, doing coral reef studies and constructing some things to simulate what it would be like to do space station assembly. We were following timelines that were set up much like the timelines that we would have on orbit, and had a daily set of these are the tasks that you're going to do. And so all of it was great training for the crew. I was commanding that mission, and I was with two rookies, and I had just been gotten back from my first mission. So I was like, okay, this is like space flight. You need to know this, and, this is the mistake I made. And, keep this in mind when you're doing this. And then this is not so much like space flight. Don't worry about that. And so it was a great way for me to share my knowledge and experience with these rookies, who I happened to actually end up flying with. So it was a great experience.
So much of your career is also around STEM and science and the just mathematics. Obviously, everything is involving that in the space program. How important is that? And what do you say to folks that are enough women participating in STEM, and how do we grow that?
Not enough women are participating in STEM, and we need to get more excited about it. So I've been on a crusade to try and make being a nerd cool. And I want more young ladies to feel like being a nerd is cool. And so that we can get more and more that will stay with it. I think there's always that initial interest, but there's something in high school where we're losing a lot of folks. And so for all the parents or teachers or mentors out there, keep in mind that you got to help them keep those science dreams alive, so that they will continue with that pursuit in the future. So we do need to encourage our young ladies to really push themselves and challenge themselves in science, because it is cool.
Is there an experiment that you look back on that you've gotten to perform in space that's your favorite, and why?
I've really literally done hundreds of experiments in space, and I think that's what I love the most about them, is being able to be the hands of all these different investigators, brilliant folks who've thought up all these interesting ideas. For me personally, I really enjoyed some of the experiments that involved culturing cells, whether it was bone cells or stem cells, cardiac cells. Those, to me, I really enjoyed that because I like cell culture. I had done that after my PhD, and so I really enjoyed that. It felt good, and I like growing things. It's kind of, I think, an Iowa thing. I like to grow things.
Well, you mentioned growing soybeans at the same time that your dad was. I'm curious, were there technologies that you were able to keep in touch from up there? Was that possible?
Well, I mean, a lot of the investigations, like the soybean one, was done by Pioneer. And so, they were looking for potential optimizations for gene expression of different things, and of course that's proprietary if they found something, and some of the investigations are like that. So their information is proprietary. But what I think is really cool is that in a long duration laboratory like that, you get a lot of access to the experiments, and it's more like being in a laboratory here on the ground. So there was one experiment I was doing. It was looking at a colloidal solution of iron. So it was basically iron granules in solution. And if you put them in an electromagnetic field, they formed solid structure. They think that would be good for development for increasing structural strength during earthquakes or shock absorbers and things like that. So that was why they were doing the investigation. But we had been looking at this study for a while, and then one day I was inputting the value of the electromagnetic field, and instead of 20 hertz, I put in 2 with a tiny little decimal that my eyes didn't really see, and a 0. So it was 2 hertz instead of the 20 hertz. And instead of a solid structure, it formed a wave path structure. So it was a moving structure. And they're like, we've never seen that before. And so that's kind of interesting, that you can come up with these discoveries like that, we weren't expecting that kind of thing. Those are pretty exciting.
So I have one question from my daughters that they were asking this morning. They're curious what your favorite and least favorite food is to eat in space.
That's a great question. So we have dehydrated foods, which, like oatmeal raisin for breakfast. That works pretty good. Mac and cheese, dehydrated, you rehydrate it. It works great. It's good mac and cheese. Then they have vegetables that are dehydrated and rehydrated. There's a kind of squishy. But my favorite was we have these in foil pouches. They're like MREs, military rations, ready to eat kind of thing. And they're specially made by the NASA laboratories because we have to have lower salt because of that whole bone problem I talked about before. And so, but my favorite was chicken fajitas because it's pretty much like chicken fajitas. And so that was my all-time favorite. I never got tired of it in the 665 days I was up there.
How many times do you get to eat it while you're up there? Do they let you pick, or do you have to have a rotation?
There's a certain number of food rotations, but that's kind of one of the things about learning about your team. Who's favorite? What is whose favorite? So after a while, you figure out, this person likes chicken fajitas, or this person. I had my commander on my first flight. He loved pudding. I'm like, I can go without pudding. You can have all the pudding. Just things like that to get along, help each other have a little bit more of what you really like.
You talked a little bit about mentorship, and I know we're running short on time, but I'm curious, the opportunities that were afforded to you, what does it take to be a good mentor? And, who was a mentor particularly strong to your roadmap?
Oh, I've been really lucky. I feel like at Iowa Wesleyan, I had an advisor, Dr. Dolores Graff, and then when I got to Rice University, I had another advisor, Kathleen Matthews. Then I got to Johnson Space Center, and I had Nitsa Cintron and Carolyn Huntoon. All of them are amazing and motivated ladies. And they made me believe I could do what I wanted to dream of because they were such strong female leaders, strong role models for me. And of course, I had my mom growing up as well. Farm ladies aren't tenderhearted. They're not too delicate. They get the job done. And so all of those were great role models for me. I think the important thing for a mentor is, it may be, your job's not directly related to what the person you're trying to help's goal is. If you can try and get them synced up, meet somebody, and if they happen to run into folks like I did, be the encouragement, even if they aren't totally supportive. But as a mentor, that support is huge. And, just being able to introduce them to people that will help them and aspire to something bigger. That's, I think, very important.
How did you mentioned being shy. How did you find those mentors? How did you get out of that shell to make that connection?
I think the being shy, being introverted is, just part of who I am. But I was in situations with them where I was able to be one-on-one with them and, open up and, I respected them all greatly. So it allowed me to share a lot of information with them. And then they were in turn shared a lot of what they went through in their lives and what, and they opened doors for me that otherwise I might not never have known existed.
Last question for you. You have a beautiful view from the space station. Does it ever get hard to go to work instead of just look outside each day?
Yeah, sometimes it is hard. But one of the great things about the exercise device, the resistive exercise device I told you about, it was right next to the cupola windows, so we could go take a peek, between sets.
That would be inspiring. That could maybe even get me to the gym. So Peggy, I appreciate the time. On behalf of the entire Iowa Ideas team and behalf of all of the participants, thank you so much for taking time with us today. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. And they were great questions. And I'm really thrilled to be a part of Iowa Ideas.
Thank you.